are in a series entitled The Fall and the Rise of Joseph. Usually when something's titled Fall and Rise, they usually say Rise and Fall. But Joseph began with a fall, but he ended up with a rise. He ended up in a good place when it was all said and done. And as I said last week, this series is not just about Joseph and his brothers, but it's about you and me. That we can find our story in Joseph's story. We saw that Joseph was his father's favorite son, and this sparked jealousy among his other brothers. His father gave him a fancy, colorful coat, and every time he wore it, it reminded the brothers that Joseph was the favorite of the father and the mother. And then that jealousy became so strong because Joseph would flaunt the fact that he was the favorite son, that bitterness began to take over the souls of the brothers. And here's what we saw last time. This is what happens when bitterness takes over your soul. Number one, you start to speak sarcastically. As we saw, they said to one another, "Look, here comes the hero of those dreams. Here comes that dreamer." They were kind of mocking Joseph. That's where bitterness begins to reveal itself. Then step two, they start entertaining evil thoughts. And the brothers said to each other, "Now come, let us kill him." That's pretty evil. "And throw him into one of the pits. And we'll say that a wild beast devoured him." So you start talking about things to eradicate the problem. And then step three, action. You put that plan into action when you're bitter. And it tells us that when Joseph came to his brothers, they pulled off his fancy coat and they threw him into a dry well. And then they sold him to a Midianite caravan on their way to Egypt. And remember, this is not any caravan. This is a caravan on its way to Egypt. This is a very special caravan. I could call this God's caravan. When God uses things to get people from point A to point B, well, that thing belongs to God. And then we saw step four, the heart of the bitter people becomes so hardened, they think nothing of saying hurtful things to others. And remember what they did. They brought to their father Joseph's coat, and they told him he was eaten by a wild animal, and that's all that's left, this bloody colored coat. And we said that Joseph went from being in a pit to a caravan, from a caravan to a strange land. In a strange land, he went to a strange house. And the brothers had become a prisoner of their bitterness, but Joseph had become a prisoner of God. And I think that's a choice we all make. Whatever happens to you, do you want to become a prisoner of bitterness, or do you want to become a prisoner of God? You will be a prisoner either way. And what does that mean to be a prisoner? It means that someone will have its way with you. So either bitterness will have its way with you, or God will have his way with you. And that's the choice that we make. Genesis 37 ends with verse 36. Meanwhile, the Midianites sold Joseph in Egypt to Potiphar, Pharaoh's officer, the captain of the bodyguard. So, Joseph has now become a slave in the house of Potiphar. He's in Egypt. Potiphar is a high-ranking soldier. He bought Joseph, and Joseph is added to the slaves of his own household. Now in chapter 39, we find the plan of God going into action. You know what's so great about God? God is a God of action. He doesn't just sit around. He's a God of action. He's always doing something, always working. And remember we said Joseph had become a prisoner of God? Well, notice what happened in verse 2. The Lord was with Joseph. That's good right there. I mean, that's a whole message. The Lord was with Joseph. Why? Because he was a prisoner of God. Was the Lord with the brothers? I think not, because they were bitter. God doesn't hang out with bitter people. So the Lord was with Joseph. He became a successful man. And he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. Now, although Joseph was in the plan of God for his life, he didn't really understand what was happening. You know, it's easier in hindsight to look back after you've gone through something and see how God was moving in a specific situation. But when you're going through it, it's kind of difficult to see God. When you're in the middle of that thing, it's hard to see God because you don't know what's going on. You don't know why it's happening. But you come through it and you look back and you're like, now I saw how God was working all along. But right now, I don't know if Joseph is really thinking, oh, this is great. I'm right where God wants me to be. I just think he's thinking, I don't know what he's thinking. 17 years old. What's it like? Sold into slavery by his own family members. Taken hundreds of miles to a strange land. He's in the midst of foreign gods. These people worship all kinds of gods. Joseph's not around his church people. He's exposed to foreign customs and to foreign language. And you're only 17 years old. He's in a place where everything is strange. Everything is different. And he's just a teenager. We will see, unlike his brothers, rather than become bitter, he chose to bloom where he was planted. This is the lesson today. Can you, or try to, bloom where you are planted? God put Joseph in a place that wasn't that ideal. But we're going to see that Joseph bloomed in that place. And you know, that can happen to us too. God can put you in a place that is not that ideal, but you can bloom in that place. You know what Joseph did? He learned the Egyptian language. He improved his skills. He bettered himself all around. In that place, he said, I'm going to use this place to make myself a better person. That's revolutionary. That's radical. To be in a place that you don't like, that you'd rather not be, and say, I'm going to use this place to make me a better person. Make me a better person. That's radical thinking. Imagine how our lives could improve if we could think that way. Every time we're in a place that we're not so thrilled about, use it for the good rather than the bad. Now notice in verse 3, now his master, who was Potiphar, saw that the Lord was with him and how the Lord caused all that he did to prosper in his hand. Because Joseph made a really good decision, we see two outcomes here. Number one, Joseph stayed faithful to God. You know, it's very easy for people when they find themselves in a place they don't want to be, to say, forget you, God. I'm done. This isn't working for me. I tried it. It didn't work. You know how many people do that? Way too many. They don't like where they are, so they blame God and run from God because of where they are in life. Not Joseph, though. Joseph stayed faithful to God as a slave. And number two, Potiphar observed Joseph's character. Potiphar's watching this kid. And he's looking at him. He said, man, this kid impresses me. I like this kid. This kid's outshining all my other servants, all of them. See, because true faithfulness does not remain a secret. When you are a truly faithful individual, people take notice. They notice your faith. People notice the levels of our faith. We could have different levels of faith, and people will, they're going to get it right every time. You can be faithful at work. And that's radical. I thought faithfulness was just for church. No, you can be faithful to God at work. You can be faithful to God when you're home. Faithful to God when you're hanging out with your friends. You know, there is a faithfulness, and there is what I call a true faithfulness. And there's a difference. Let me show you how there's a difference. A person can be faithful when it's convenient, but true faithfulness is consistent. Convenience, consistence. There was a man who stopped into a chicken franchise. How many people like chicken franchises? Okay, Chick-fil-A. He stopped into a chicken franchise to get some lunch for him and the lady that was with him. And he took his order of chicken and he drove out to a park. And when he opened the box, he was surprised to see in the box there was money instead of chicken. Why was there money in the box instead of chicken? Because the manager would put money in the chicken box in case he was robbed. They wouldn't think to steal the box. They come after what's in the register. So he put most of the money in the chicken box. Well, the man who found the money, he quickly returned the box to the manager at the store. And the guy was elated. Oh, thank you so much. He said, stick around here. I'm going to call the newspaper. You're the most honest man I know. I'm going to call the paper. We're going to get your picture. We're going to show everybody what an honest guy you are. Nah, you don't have to do that. It's nothing. Don't. I just returned it. Give me my chicken. I'll go home. Here's your money. No, I insist. We're going to call the paper. You are an honest guy. People need to see what an honest guy looks like. And again, no, really, I don't want it. Why not? Why don't you want the paper to come down and take your picture and show everybody how honest you are? He said, well, I came into the store to buy some lunch, and I went out to the park to eat some lunch, and the lady that I'm with is not my wife. Yeah. There is a convenient faithfulness, and there is a consistent faithfulness. See, we can be faithful when it's convenient, but I don't think that gets the job done. I don't think convenient faithfulness ever would have gotten Joseph promoted to what we're going to be seeing in a couple of weeks. But consistent faithfulness is what people take notice of and what God takes notice of. So, what's the result of Joseph's consistent faithfulness? Verse 4. Joseph found favor in his sight, speaking of Potiphar, and became his personal servant. One-on-one, Mr. French. Remember Mr. French? I'm so glad I lived when I did. He became his personal servant, and he made him overseer over his house, and all that he owned he put in his charge. Joseph was like promoted to supervisor of the house, the foreman of the house. He was over everybody, all the slaves, all the servants. He was in charge of everything. Why? Because God was with him. And because God was with him, he set out to make the best of a bad situation. That's what you do. When you find yourself in a bad situation, what do? You make the best of it. You use it to become a better person. That's what you do. God blessed Joseph, and now Potiphar blesses Joseph. This didn't happen overnight. I'm sure it took years of hard work and determination and commitment to God in a strange world. See, this takes time. That's why consistent faithfulness is so important. You know, difficulties can bring out the best in a person. Have you ever noticed, ladies, that you clean your house better when you're angry at your husband? Ever notice that? I know sometimes if Donna's mad at me for, I don't know why. How could that ever happen? I don't know. And I come home and it's like, wow, house is sparkling. Wow. Oh, she must really be mad now. It's really sparkling. I'm in trouble. Oh. But you know, you take that energy, right? And you're like, you know, you burn off all that angry energy and you have a beautiful house. So I wouldn't recommend it on a regular basis, but Okay? I caught a line on a commercial on TV the other day. I couldn't even remember what the commercial was because one line stuck in my head. The girl in the commercial said, "I push myself as far as I can." And that just stuck with me. I push myself as far as I can. I don't know if the majority of people really exert themselves like they could and like they should. It made me think about how much I push myself in certain areas of life. And I think, where am I lazy? And where am I full of excuses for the things that I don't do that I probably should do? And then I think, where can I do better? Where can I be more intentional and accomplish better things, maybe some more things? What area can I improve? How can I push myself as far as I can? And I want to give you a little help today. If you're using the notebook, and I would recommend you pick one up, this notebook, it's just a little study guide. We have them in the Media Center, Going Deeper with God. And the intention is to take notes during the service. And then there's a place where you can write down how you're going to apply the message, and then your action points. Because if you don't have action points to what you learn, it's not really a great day, okay? So I would recommend that in the action point, what you would do would be identify some areas, like here, that maybe you've become lazy, or maybe some places that you could improve, and then what you will do to become better in those areas. Because that's how we do it. We have to do it intentionally. We can't do it on our own. So I would recommend that you pick one up. This is good for 52 Sundays. Like I said, if you only come on Christmas, it's good for 52 years. If you come on Christmas and Easter, you'll get 26 years out of it. That's a good investment. Okay, so you can pick that up there too. Okay, so too many people live a status quo experience. They do. Status quo. They are where they are, and they stay where they are, and they have a million reasons to be there. They just kind of like exist. They don't exert themselves. They don't go that extra mile. They have discovered a place in life that's called comfort, convenience, and they have settled in. And that's where they live. And they don't go beyond comfort and beyond convenience. And they live their whole life in that place. That's okay, but they'll never be the world changers. They'll never be the people that help the church go forward, that help the company go forward, that help the family be a better family. Whatever it is, they won't be the ones that are like part of the reason for the success of something. So it's really, really important that as Christians, we have a responsibility to be the best that we can be, to do the best that we can do. So look at areas of our life where we're kind of failing or weak, and work on those areas and strengthen them. And you know what I say? Accept challenges that you're afraid to accept. There are challenges that will come into your life, and you're like, oh, I don't know if I can do that. Do it. Do it. It'll make you a better person. Joseph was not a status quo individual. He wasn't. He was placed in charge of the whole house. Where did he go from? He went from being just a teenage slave, and he worked his way up to being in charge of like everybody. He's the foreman of the whole house. Verse 4. So Joseph found favor in his sight and became his personal servant, and he made him overseer over his house, and all that he owned he put in his charge. Now, in order for Joseph to arrive at this place in life, he had to prove himself in the smaller areas of life. See, if you want to handle the big things, you got to practice with the little things. That's how you get good and ready for the big things. I wonder if Jesus, don't forget, Jesus knew the Old Testament. He's a young Jewish boy, went to synagogue, he learned the Old Testament, and a lot of what he said came from the Old Testament. And I wonder if Jesus was thinking of Joseph and his promotions when he said in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 16, he's speaking to the crowd, and he said, "He who is faithful in a very little thing is faithful also in much." I wonder if he was thinking of Joseph back in the book of Genesis, that Joseph was faithful in a little, bottom of the totem pole slave, but he was faithful. And he worked his way up, and now he was put in charge of great things. He who is faithful in a very little is also faithful in much. And then Jesus gave the other side. He who is unrighteous in a very little is unrighteous also in much. So you can go both ways. Character seems to be consistent when handling a little or a lot. That if you've got a little to do and you do it the best you can, when you get a lot to do, you're going to do it the best you can. You know why? That's your character. If you've got a little to do and you don't get it done, when you've got a lot to do, you're not going to get it done, because that's your character. See, what God gives us exposes our character. It should also develop our character. So think of it. Joseph became, I like this part, Joseph became, it almost doesn't make sense, that Joseph became the best slave that he could be. Right, we think about that in modern terminology, right? The best slave? Who wants to be the best slave? You're a slave. You want to be the best slave? Yeah. In God's economy, you want to be the best at anything. Wherever you are, whatever is given to you to do, you want to be the best at it. It doesn't matter what your title is. Doesn't matter how big the responsibility is. You want to do the best you can at what's been given you to do. That's what you want to do. Be the best slave. Did you ever feel like a slave? How many people, be honest, how many people ever felt like a slave? Okay, good. This is perfect. I'm so glad you came today. Now here's your wisdom. Be the best slave. Be the best one. But I don't want to be a slave. If you don't want to be a slave, here's what you do. You be the best slave you can be, and one day you won't be a slave. Not because your position might change, because it might not, but because you're going to change. And you won't see it as slavery. You won't see it as slavery. See, it's all about the attitude. It's all about how you see it. Oh, it's the night before the crucifixion. And Jesus and the disciples go up into the upper room. And it's time for their final Passover meal. And one of them is supposed to wash all the feet of the disciples. And it's like everybody's hanging around. Nobody's doing anything. Nobody's washing anybody's feet. So Jesus looks and he goes, So he goes and gets a bowl of water and some towels. And he has everybody sit down. He washes all their feet. He takes on the role of a slave. Why? Because it's all about attitude. That's all it is. It's not position. That Jesus, you know what Jesus did? He gave nobility to slavery. He allowed servanthood to be a position of nobility. That's in God's world. Servanthood is noble. So whatever menial thing you have to do, it's noble. It's a noble thing. Don't ever think, oh, that's so menial, that's below me. Well, Jesus was the guest at the Last Supper, and instead of them washing his feet, he washed their feet. Why? Because he added a new dimension to servanthood, to slavery. So bloom where you are planted. If you feel like a slave in some area of life, you be the best slave that you can be. And I'll tell you what, you will feel good about yourself. You'll feel much better about yourself. So, in summary so far, at 17 years old, Joseph had been torn from his family, sold into slavery, and how easy it would have been for Joseph to rebel, to become bitter and filled with hate. He could have. As a matter of fact, kids today, when things like that happen to kids, they join gangs. They join gangs and they go down the wrong roads. Why do they do that? Because they all have a need of acceptance. And if they're not accepted in the home, well, they'll go somewhere else to find acceptance. Doesn't matter whether it's good or bad. It's not an issue to them. Good or bad is secondary to acceptance. That's a need that people have. That's a tremendous need. People have a need to be accepted. They do. So when kids aren't accepted at home, they'll go somewhere and they'll find acceptance. It could be a circle of drug users. It could be a gang. It could be a group of people that are just rebellious because they're looking for acceptance too. So Joseph could have done that. He could have man, you know what? I hate my brothers. I hate my family. I hate Judaism. Look at this, is great. Look at Egypt. Beautiful buildings. Best wine in the world. Thousands of gods. People can do what they want. There's no rules. You can do whatever you want. The flesh is reigning. He could have gone all that way. But he said no. No, he stayed faithful. He not only stayed faithful, he stayed consistently faithful. Not conveniently faithful, consistently faithful. I think if we're conveniently faithful, number one, there's always going to be a period of failure. Number two, you're going to let somebody down. But when you're consistently faithful, it's a world of difference. Tremendous difference. And I believe though he was far from home and far from his family, he remained near to God. And why is it he could remain near to God in a place where there was no God? You know why? Because God was real to him. That's why. God was real. And I think that's a question we have to ask ourselves also. How real is God to me? I mean, how real is he to me? Is he real enough to me for me to be consistently faithful? Is he real enough to me to abide in his ways? Is he real enough to me for me to get to know him and find out his will for my life? Is he real enough for me just to get me to heaven? Oh, I believe Jesus came and died. That's it, man, get me to heaven, I'm on my way. But is he real enough for you to direct your steps day after day after day? To get you out of bed in the morning, go to work, be the best worker, the best slave? Is he real enough for you to know that there was a lot of lost people in the world and they need people like you to bring them the hope of Christ? Is he real enough to you to make your life change, to change you as a person? Maybe to change the direction that you're going in and really commit yourself to the kingdom of God? Is he real enough? He was to Joseph. That Joseph was in a place kind of like the Hebrew boys. When they were abducted and they went to Babylon, they stayed faithful. Unlike the prodigal son, who went off on his own into a far distant country. And what did he do? Oh man, he joined the culture. He lived it up. Hard Rock Cafe. He went to all the places and spent all his money. And then he was broke and hungry and dirty. See, notice the outcome. The outcome of the prodigal son that went into a far country was disaster. The outcome of Joseph that went into a foreign country was blessing. And it all had to do with how real Was God to them? How real? And if you continue to ask yourself, oh, how real is God to me? And you know when there's a good time to ask that? When you're about to do something that maybe you shouldn't do. Maybe like, this is questionable, if not outright wrong. And then you say, okay, how real is God to me? And hopefully, God will be so real that you'll do the right thing instead of the wrong thing. God was so real to Joseph, Potiphar saw it in Joseph. He said, man, in this kid, his God is real and shining through. And that's why he promoted him all over his house and over all the other servants. Notice in verse 6, so he left everything he owned in Joseph's charge. And with him there he did not concern himself with anything except the food which he ate. So Joseph was in charge of everything except the food. Potiphar had his own cook. He probably knew the cook a lot better. And he's like, I'm not taking any chances with being poisoned. You know, in those days when you were in a high authority, you had a cook that prepared your food. Because anybody could come along and poison that food and you'd be gone. But Joseph, being a foreigner, he figured, well, you know, I don't want to go too far, but he put him in charge of everything. And then the end of verse 6 says, now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. What that does, it sets the scene for the next chapter of Joseph's life. When we come back next week, we're going to see the principle of temptation versus your testimony. That temptation will come into your life. And you always have to consider, when temptation comes into your life, your testimony. What will people think of me if temptation has its way? What will people think of me? For some people, they don't care. But that's not us. Joseph's testimony got him to where he is. The testimony is how people see you. It's what people see in you. That's your testimony. And I'll just give you one little thing about temptation. You never want to fight temptation in the hour of temptation. You want to fight temptation before the temptation arrives. It's like, what? What does that mean? It means that if you're in the midst of if the temptation is facing you, you will fall. You will fall. Temptation is powerful. Oh, it's powerful. So how do I beat temptation before it comes? I make a decision in my mind. Were this thing to happen, I already know what I'm going to do. Were this temptation to rise up in front of me, I already decided a long time ago, previously, what I will do with that temptation. And I will not get so close to it, and I will not entertain it, because it'll destroy you. Like Daniel purposed in his heart not to defile himself with the king's meat. He purposed in his heart. When the Hebrew boys were all taken to Babylon and Nebuchadnezzar gave them Babylonian clothing and Babylonian names and Babylonian food, Daniel drew the line. I'm not going to defile myself with the food of the Babylonians. Why? Because it's offered to idols. I don't want any part of it. But the Bible tells us that he purposed in his heart ahead of time. And that's what we have to do. And if you know that you're going to be in a place that you could find yourself in a compromising situation, whatever that situation could be, make up your mind ahead of time that you will not fail in that area. And you do everything that you can to avoid that situation. You have to avoid it. The best protection against temptation is to avoid the temptation. Don't go near it. If it seems like it's going to be one, then you go the other way. Well, we'll see next week how temptation versus our testimony. Let's bow our heads.